Minasan konnichiwa, and welcome to the Board Game Dojo, where we are filming the outdoor edition today. Hopefully the seagulls aren't going to be too loud. They've been really boisterous this morning. But today we are going to talk to you about essential expansions. We're going to talk about what even is an essential expansion. We're going to go over some that are universally praised as them, and then we're going to give you a list of 5 expansions that we think are essential that need to be talked about more. Before we begin, I just want to say a quick thank you to our newest coffee members, Cerule13 and Tigers. They will get an exclusive video every month, as well as they will get to choose what we cover in the upcoming month. For July, they have chosen My Best Chef, a game all about running a restaurant from Smart Ape Games. If you would like to join, and it's of course not mandatory at all, but if you'd like to join, I will put a link to it in the description below. It allows us to remain as unbiased as possible because we don't need to take money from companies to cover the games, and it also allows us to just buy more games to cover for you. So without further ado, let's get to the good stuff. And I think a good place to start is, what is an essential expansion? What makes an expansion good versus great versus essential? For us, and remember that these are generalities, these aren't set in stone or anything, but for us, a good expansion is an expansion that is good. We like playing with it, but we could take it or leave it. If you want to play with it, great. If you want to play without it, that's fine too. Whatever. And I think a good example of this is Seven Wonders Duel Agora. In fact, the podcast episode where we review Seven Wonders Duel Agora and Pantheon is the inspiration behind today's episode. Seven Wonders Duel Agora does add a little bit of spice to it. It gives a little bit of a freshening up after I've played it so many times, but I don't really need to play with it at all. I am perfectly happy playing it just Seven Wonders Duel and Pantheon. A great expansion is an expansion that I would absolutely prefer to play it with. If you asked me to play it, I would say, yes, can we please play with the expansion? But if you don't have it, then I'll at least still play the base game. I think another way an expansion might be great is that it's needed only after I've played it so many times that I've burnt out on the original. I think that that is a great expansion. A great example of a great expansion would be Food Chain Magnate: The Catch-Up Mechanism. It is an expansion that, for people who have played the game so many times that they are familiar with the openings of the guru and the waitress strategy and how to counter them. I mean, they've done it so many times that they're just kind of, okay, we get that the first 10 turns are going to kind of be the same in every game. If you're to that point with Food Chain Magnate, then the Catch-Up Mechanism is great because it adds in modules that change different milestones and change the different dynamics around so that you're almost playing a brand new game. But it's not really essential for everyone. It's not really needed for everyone. I will play Food Chain Magnate, just the base game, and so therefore it is just a great expansion, which it's still pretty good. So what makes an essential expansion? Well, what makes an essential expansion is that I refuse to play the base game without it. It could be because the base game is bad and the expansion makes it good or great. It might turn a good game to an amazing game, or it might just fix fundamental issues with the game that left me not wanting to play the game in the first place. These are games in which I can say with the expansion is the best possible way for you to play this game. And once you play with the expansion, you will never go back. So why would you just start with the less perfect version that might turn you off from the game in the first place? Now, our goal in today's video is not to rehash and repeat the same games that when you type in most essential board game expansions on YouTube that you'll see on tens of lists. We don't really want to do that. But at the same time, if you are new to board games or new to thinking about adding board games to your collection, we don't want to leave out those games altogether. So I do just want to give you a few that are pretty universally accepted as essential expansions that won't be on our list. The first one being Terraforming Mars: The Prelude expansion. The Prelude expansion makes an overly long game a little bit less overly long, and it does that by giving each player an asymmetric company that is really good at doing something. It also does it by giving you starting resources that you will be playing that you will get to draft from and start playing so that your economy just gets going faster. It speeds up. It basically eliminates the first half an hour of what the base game does so that you're already starting off at the fun part of the game. Plus, any time that you can take a half an hour off of a 2 to 3 hour long game is great in my book. The next expansion that is pretty universally seen as essential, in fact, it has an essential edition, is the Tuscany expansion for Viticulture. Now, Viticulture by itself is already a decent game. It's a good game that is quite liked by a lot of people, but it is pretty universally accepted that Tuscany adds in so much good to this game as to why would you ever play without it. For one thing, it adds that you're playing in all 4 seasons instead of just 2. But it also gives you special workers that you can hire that do special things, like allowing you to go back in time. So like if it's in the winter and you really need something in the summer, there are special workers that allow you to do that. Or there's certain structures that allow you to be better at certain things as well. It also adds a little bit of area control to the side as well. So there's a nice little mini game that you're playing over here that can also help you get resources. It just adds to the overall feeling of the game, the overall thematic elements of the game to make it feel better. Although, that time traveling one, maybe that wasn't the best example though, because that's not really accurate, huh? The next one that we'll talk about is King of Tokyo Power Up. And what this does is, in base King of Tokyo, every monster is basically the same. You were just picking it based on what looks it had. Like for me, I always picked Cyber Kitty. But what Power Up does is it gives each monster a distinct and asymmetric power set. And you'll actually activate these by rolling 3 hearts on your turn, giving you another reason that even when you're full on health, you might want to roll some hearts instead of points or attack. The Mecharaptor, for example, is really good at attacking, and the Panda is more of a pacifist that gets bonuses if you don't attack other people on your turn. It gives you a different way of playing based on which monster you are, as well as just making each part of the game stand out just a little bit more. The next one is actually for a game that I've never played, so I will leave a link to a video review for it, but it is Champions of Midgard Valhalla. This is apparently an essential expansion because when your warriors die, usually in the base game, they just nothing, it's kind of a waste. But in the Valhalla expansion, there are things that you can do with it that gets you points that actually make going into battle a little bit more worth it, worth the risk for your warriors. But again, I've never played it, it's just kind of what I've heard from it, so I will leave a link to somebody who knows more about it. The next one is Ticket to Ride 1910 expansion, and it's kind of weird because the reason that I've heard the most often of why this expansion is the most essential is because it actually just makes the cards bigger. In the original Ticket to Ride, the cards are so small that it just doesn't really feel very good. I think they're mini Euro size, which doesn't really match with the rest of the game. But with 1910, it makes the cards bigger, which is easier to read, but it also gives you more variety. So if you're looking for something like that, I think it's a very, very small expansion. I think I've seen it in just like a little, like almost like a tuck box. So it's a small expansion. But for a lot of people, it is well worth it. And finally, the last one that is pretty universally praised as an essential expansion is the Terra Incognito expansion for Civilization A New Dawn. The Terra Incognito expansion actually turns this game into a Civilization game because it allows you to go explore, it changes up the combat mechanism and the different armies, and gives you districts. The most frequent comment that I see online for this one is that it turns a game that was maybe a 5 or a 6 for a lot of people to an 8 or a 9. It turns this game into something that was disappointing to a staple and maybe their favorite Civilization game. And that, for me, is exactly what an essential expansion is supposed to do. So now, let's get into 5 that we think aren't talked about enough, but for us, definitely fit as an essential expansion. So let's start with the first one. And the first one is Wingspan Oceania. This is probably the most popular of our picks today. The first thing that Oceania adds to the base Wingspan is a new player board, and these are really important because they change the values of how much you need to make eggs or to draw new cards. And it rebalances it out so that you can't just go and spam eggs the whole game. Ooh, spamming eggs. Now I want that for breakfast. Anyway, of course, it also adds new bird cards, but it also adds Nectar, and that is the second thing, other than the player boards, that I think make this game actually essential. Nectar has 2 things. First of all, it acts as a wild, so meaning you can use it for anything, but you have to use it in the round that you got it, meaning that you need to really use it, and you definitely want to, because the second thing is you get points for if you used more than your opponents. So then you want to use the top row so that you can get the Nectar, and then you can use the Nectar to get more birds so that you can do whatever the birds do, but then also you get the points based on the Nectar. It makes the other things that you're doing on this board, other than the eggs, much more viable. Even when I'm not playing with the birds from Oceania, I'm almost always using the player boards, which by itself makes this game an essential because it helps fix a problem that a lot of people had with the base game. The next two expansions I want to talk about together because mechanically they are very different, but the additional feeling that they gave me is the same. And that is the Nightfall expansion for Parks and the Bad News Bears expansion for Barren Park. Now, Nightfall adds two key things to the Parks base game. One, goals that are just a lot better, a lot more viable. The base game has things like, well, if you get 6 trees on your cards and 5 pictures, then you get 2 points. Why would I ever spend, the opportunity cost was much too high for those. Well, it shifts these because now the goals are more like you get 1 point for every 2 suns that you have on your card. And that just seems a lot more interesting, a lot more like I'm going to try to pursue that to make as many points as I can for that goal. The second thing it adds is the campground mechanism. And what you'll do is on certain spots on the trail, you'll put these little campground tokens on. When you land on one of those spots, you'll get to choose whether you go on the trail or whether you go on the campground. And the campground has some really cool stuff, like you can turn 1 tree into 4 water, or turn 1 mountain into 3 suns, or something like that. It can altogether help you out when somebody blocked you and somewhere else on the trail. It gives you kind of an out, but it also gives you more of a choice because a lot of the times they'll land on a spot that you really want that trail spot. Do I really want to have 3 suns over 1 mountain? Maybe I need an additional mountain. But then if I don't choose this, I know that other person needs a lot of rain, so a lot of water. But if I don't choose that, then probably somebody else is going to get it. So it gives you more to think about. It gives you more choice, and it makes it so that the game doesn't feel so stagnant all the time. The Bad News Bears expansion for Barren Park also gives you a bit more choice, as first of all, it adds in the grizzly pen. Grizzlies are these huge pens that'll help get your board filled much quicker, which, by the way, you would need to fill up 5 instead of 4. But the trick is that you have to turn in a green and a white tile, the white tiles being very, very useful for their shapes. So yes, you're going to get these grizzly pens. You're making a decision to go, yes, you're getting these big grizzly pens that fill up your park so quickly, but at the same time, you're having these little 1 and 2 greens that you have to kind of like fill in these little gaps of that are so annoying and so tedious. But that was your choice. The other thing that this adds is the monorail system, which actually just makes this game just look a lot cooler because they go over the board. So when you play down a green tile, you'll put down the scaffolding, and then if you play another green tile exactly 3 spots apart, then you'll put down the other scaffolding and put a monorail down. These monorails are worth descending amounts of points like the bear statues in the base game. And so it just adds a nice little, not only just a visual touch to the game, it gives you a reason to go after the green tiles a lot more and a lot quicker, which just helps balance out the game, I think, a little bit. But what both of these expansions do that make them essential in our opinions is that they turn a game that was just good for maybe introducing people to games, or just something that we wanted to play with people who are new to gaming, and then we'd kind of put them back on the shelves and kind of keep away from them for a bit, is they made it so that we just want to play these games in general. Whether you are familiar with games or new to games, or whether it's just us, we want to now play both of these games. We are brought back to them. We want to get them off the shelves more, and that is exactly what an expansion should do. Both of these games sat at kind of a 6.5, 7 for us originally, but now they're at 8s or an 8.5. Instead of games that are just good gateway games, they are games that are just in general good. And that to me is what makes these expansions essential. So only 2 more, and the first one I want to talk about is for a party game, which feels weird saying that an expansion for a party game is essential, but I think this one is. And this is Deception Murder in Hong Kong Undercover Allies. Now, there is a non-essential part of this, which is the additional means cards. I mean, it's always nice to have if you play the game a lot, but you don't really need it. But what makes this expansion absolutely essential is that it allows you to almost shift the difficulty for the investigators and the murderers based on your group and who is winning more often. It's the shift system before the shift system from Mind MGMT. If the investigators are winning too much, then you can add roles in to make it easier for the murderers, or get rid of some from the investigators, or put more of the events that make it harder for the investigators in there. If it's too hard for the investigators, you can add in allies that'll make it easier for them. What this does is it allows you to tailor this great game to any game group that you have, because that's what happens with these social deduction games. I find a lot of people say, oh, this one is way too easy for the investigators, or oh, this one is way too easy for the murderers here. But different groups aren't exactly the same on those things. And what Undercover Allies does is it allows you to not only tailor it to one particular game group, but to tailor it to every single game group. Maybe some of the roles feel more like werewolf than what you would expect to find in a game that is supposed to be about police officers and murderers. But to me, I couldn't even tell you what roles were the expansion roles and what roles were the regular roles because they all fit in so seamlessly together that I can't imagine ever wanting to play Deception Murder in Hong Kong without it because it just all fits together and it probably should have just been one game anyway. Before we get to our last one, I did just want to mention one really briefly because it's only essential if you play it at certain player counts, and some people, if they back the Kickstarter, already have it, and that is Smartphone Inc. Status Update 1.1. This makes a game that is fantastic at 4 and 5 players. It makes it fantastic at 2 and 3 as well. So if you ever play this one at 2 using just the base game, you're like, wow, this feels way too open. I like this so much better at 5. Well, get the Status Update 1.1 expansion and you'll find that you're having just as much fun as you are at 5 players. So the last one is probably the most controversial one here because I don't actually like the base game very much, but with the expansion, I like it. And that's what I was talking about earlier. If it makes a game that you think is bad into a game you want to play, hey, that's an essential expansion for you. And it is Tzolk'in, the Mayan Calendar, Tribes, and Prophecies. So Tzolk'in by itself is the game of gears, right? And you're having to put down a worker somewhere, and then you have to wait a bunch of turns as the gears go around in a circle, and you'll take it off when you want to actually get that resource. To me, it's cool, but there's just a little bit of choice overload. There's a lot of things that you could be doing there, and I never know quite what to do. So Tribes and Prophecies, what it does is it gives you an asymmetric faction that you'll get to play with that actually starts you off with some resources, a la the Prelude expansion we talked about for Terraforming Mars. But so that gives you some direction as to what to do. But what it also does is gives you prophecies that you know ahead of time, so that you know what you need to work towards. Because if you fulfill those prophecies, then you get points. But if you don't, then you lose stuff. So it's giving you direction in 2 ways. It's giving you something that your faction is particularly good at, and it's giving you these prophecies to work towards. And for me, it's just exactly what this game needed. Now I can understand what I need to do in this game. And so now it's all about using the mechanisms that I can now more appreciate in a way to get to those prophecies, in a way to use my faction to its fullest extent. It was actually pretty weird because the first time I played this game, it was with the expansion and I didn't even know it. I just thought that was how the game was. So then the next time I played it with a group of people, and it was just the base game. I was like, where's my faction? What am I supposed to be doing? And I just kind of bounced off of it a little bit harder. And I've tried it again on BGA and I don't like it as much either. So again, that's a pretty essential expansion if you can take a game that I don't really want to play at all to a game that I am eagerly seeking out. And that is the Tribes and Prophecies expansion for Tzolk'in. So what do you think of our list? Do you agree or disagree with our picks? Do you agree with our definitions of good, great, and essential expansion? Well, leave a comment below or go let us know on Twitter and Instagram or email us at boardgamedojopodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for watching today. As always, arigatou gozaimasu. Until next time, ja ne.
Birds are loud.